In this video, we're going to talk about ancient Egyptian architecture. And when you say ancient Egypt, most people think of the pyramids of Giza. But there was more to it than that. And we're going to look at the residential. So we're talking specifically about the Nile River Valley. And one of the reasons we know more about the ancient Egyptians than we do about the Neolithic peoples is because they wrote things down. They created an alphabet, and we were able to figure out what it said based on the Rosetta Stone, which is shown here. I remember studying this when I was a child. I was so fascinated by it. This is their alphabet. The symbol represents roughly our letters. Now, it's not an exact match. As you'll see, there are a couple of B's, and there's no well, okay, I see there's some that are duplicated. It's pretty close, right? So using that, we were able to figure out what they were saying. Now, as we talked about, most people think at the pyramids. We're not going to look at the pyramids in this course because this is focusing on residential. However, just briefly, there's some really cool things about the pyramids I just kind of want to throw in here. There are more than 80 pyramids in Egypt, and they were all made without any modern technology whatsoever. Everything they did was done by hand. And obviously that's impressive, but they also unfortunately used slave labor, and they used animals, and they used people that they had kidnapped and forced into slavery to build the pyramids. The pyramids were these massive buildings that were meant to honor the dead, and specifically their kings and queens and royalty. There's some different types of buildings, or different types of pyramids, and this just kind of just shows a little bit of the cross section through them, as well as some plan views. And their attendant buildings are buildings that supported them, like a mortuary temple or a complex that supported the maintenance of the pyramid. And these are just so beautiful. I had to show you these. The designs, right? So this is when we talk about Egyptian style, we talk about Egyptian architectural style. This is an example of some of the most beautiful parts of it. They designed for what was around them, like all humans do. And you can see the lotus flower, the lotus bud, papyrus, the heads, you'll see faces, were very much a part of their designs. Leaves from the plants in their area, animals, beetles, scarabs, crocodiles. I'm trying to think of all the different animals, hawks, cats, ibis. I'm trying to think. So they decorated their architecture because it was what was around them, and it was what was abundant. And they translate some of that into some really beautiful design. I just love these columns. I think they're just beautiful. So while the pyramids, and it's important to put this in context, the pyramids were these massive buildings where they did all kinds of really amazing, interesting feats of defying physics. But they did it with manual labor. And the people, however, lived in mud and papyrus houses like this. Their houses were much simpler. The Nile flooded every year, so mud was available as a raw material, very easy to make. So that's why you see a lot of this. This is obviously a reconstruction of what how the people lived. These are the gated walls for the royalty, right? So the king lived in there. There wasn't a lot of wood, so when they did have it, they used it for small things: doorways, ceiling supports, furniture, embellishments, because as you see, vast desert. So that's generally what you're going to see as a trend, no matter where we go and what we look at, that a lot of the basics are very similar because, we're human beings, we live in a certain way, but the style and the materials are contingent upon what's available in the region. It wasn't until much later, when globalization hit, that we in mass manufacturing, that we started to say, well, I can have a house that has materials that come from thousands of miles away. We study sustainable design. Transporting things is not sustainable. You really green and sustainable design, you want to work with the materials in your environment. It makes that long haul cheaper, and it makes the footprint of your building more sustainable. And so these are very sustainable. They used what was around them. They're also very green. They're all materials that were found in nature. And most of these don't exist anymore because of years and years of wind erosion. Here is an example of a typical residence in Egypt. And you can see this is not terribly different. If you go to downtown Atlanta and you look at some of those cottages, the whole property is laid out exactly like this. I saw this and it immediately reminded me of a friend's house, and she lives in just north of downtown, and it's just laid out like this. Here are some recreations by artists. The one on the left is clearly an illustration. The one on the bottom right is a model. And then the one at the top actually dissects what the house looked like on the inside. Now, obviously, the first ones we saw here are, more the lower end. These people lived in cities. These people are have a little bit more property to spread out. And then obviously these are the more upper end Egyptian houses. They had more property, and they had water and trees. And when you're in a desert, having trees is a luxury. And so what's interesting to note is that modern Egyptian residences still have very similar style to what we see with the ancient Egyptian residences. They're just more fitted with modern appliances and comforts, but you still see they still have the big pool. I'll show you another one. They still have the big pool, and the colors are still the same. And what a great view. It's really nice. And here's another one. And the link, if you want to look at this further, is there to look at some more modern Egyptian architecture. But since we're focusing on the history. And so one of the things I want to point out in the style of the architecture is that you often see, because they live in the desert and it gets hot, you will often see a lot of, the houses are low to the ground because heat rises. There are a lot of large overhangs to block the sun from directly hitting the windows and coming in. We now have technology where we can insulate glass. Glass is the worst material for leaking heat, either into the building in the summer or out in the winter. It's just terribly terrible in terms of insulation. But the best insulator there is, and this is going to surprise a lot of people, is air. So if you take two pieces of glass and you have a gap in between that you fill with air, we use argon, which is not very environmentally correct if it leaves the window. But that gap is enough to help change how much transference of heat there is between the glass. And so you'll see more modern buildings, obviously, with that. But they still use the overhangs to help shade and block. They also use stone. They continue to use stone. They continue to use mud because it's very common in that area. It's just with our technology, we've been able to turn it into something a little more refined and a little cleaner. But they have pools and very similar in style to ancient Egyptian architecture. Okay, so this one was short and sweet. I'm going to end it here and see you in the next.